Hi, this is Craig Snyder, Call Sign Crunch, and this is Air Boss.
This is authentic.
All right, so we get up into the tower. You're getting set up for the first event. The radios are all pre-flighted. Everything's ready to go, and the handler's down there, and he's spotting the deck. What are you? And the helo is turning. It's ready to go. Helo's gonna be okay. What are you thinking about right now?
Worried, we talked about worried about helicopters, worried about the tower set up appropriately. The next step is airplan study, right? And we have an idea of what the airplane looked like, but as you well know, the airplane might come out at midnight or 01 or 02, and it might be different than what we were shown at 2000 or 1800 the day prior, right? So now we're breaking down the airplane kind of front to back and looking for those head hurters, looking for the non-standard things. Do we have an early launch? Do we have a mid-cycle recovery, like something like a COD, the DV, right? DV warfare, where you're like, okay, who put the COD in the middle of the cycle and why? Right, and then you're looking at other things like how many helos am I recovering on my dwell periods? Are we refueling one guy, which is no big deal? Or are we trying to get 4 or 5 out the door, right? And that, there's that one of 1,000 things that will affect you during the day. But it basically boils down to airplan study, and then like I said, I would try to put Minimax up on the window so that I had the entire day's launch and recovery sequence worked out. Time, and then we'd fill in the side numbers as they came up during the day. And then if all those things are good and in line, then hopefully by the time you get up there, I'm just briefing you on issues, right? And it's like, hey boss, We're good to go, or hey, it looks like event 4 is going to be a bear, and here's why, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely true. And then somewhere in there, you're getting that whole thing ready. You're getting it ready make sure the flight deck's ready to go. Usually I'd be rolling in as airplanes have started, and they're usually lined up for the catapult by the time I roll up there. They're like a few minutes from the first launch, typically, is what I would recall. And it's usually because I'm like, I have to leave, and I leave whatever it is that I was pulling my attention and get up there. And then somewhere between that first launch going, and, somewhere in there, you and I would look at our day and we would plan out the breaks. And I specifically remember, like, you and I, you showed me how you and Pugsley had done that. And I was like, oh, this is genius. Where you would sit there and go, okay, there's a department head meeting here. There's this other meeting here, all the HOD meeting, whatever it was. And then, you and I would be like, all right, here's lunch, here's a workout, Flash is going to work out here, Crunch is going to work out here. And we'd plan out all of our breaks. And holy cow, if the whole day wasn't filled for 12 hours, and we'd be up there for the whole time, just going from event to event, and trying to get all personal stuff done in addition to the administrative stuff, in addition to flying, because the flying would be, from first launch to last recovery of a cyclic event is what, maybe an hour, 45 minutes? What do you think?
Depends on what your multiple is, right? But I mean, if you're efficient and you're on track and your multiple is about 20, then you're looking at 30 minutes to knock all that out. Actually, should be much better than that, but about half an hour. But then,
what do you mean by multiple?
Multiple is the total number of aircraft launched plus the total number of aircraft recovered. So if you launch 5 airplanes but you're recovering 20, then your multiple is 25, right? So it's a kind of a quick measure of how much work you've got to do on that cycle. And they're generally pretty close to each other, or at least you want them to be pretty close to each other, right? You want to launch 13, recover 11, something like that. But sometimes they're a little out of balance. Like if you've got a huge alpha strike going out or coming back, something like that, your launches might outweigh your recoveries by quite a bit, just depending.
But let's talk about the difference. I think you put this in the notes here, the difference between a CQ ops, cyclic ops, and a ready deck scenario. Let's talk about cyclic ops and how that works for our listeners, because a lot of times people don't realize exactly what that means. So event one, there's no airplanes flying at the moment. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. There's 10 airplanes to launch. At 10 o'clock, we have one or two airplanes going down the catapult at the same time. They hit the water brake, bam, and off they go. There's our first two airplanes, and we launch roughly every 30 seconds, day VFR, right? And you're getting them airborne. Obviously, I think Ford is a little bit different, but in a normal carrier, right? Roughly every 30 seconds, you should be averaging to get an airplane airborne. How's my math? Is that right?
Yeah, no, that's right on. We're shooting for no more than a minute, but you can do better than that by quite a bit. What do we call it when we get two airplanes off the deck at the same time?
Would be a covey launch.
See, it never leaves you. It never leaves you.
Well,
Yeah,
that's a good
covey.
point. So how do you do a covey launch? You could have an airplane off the bow and an airplane off the waist, and boom, they could go at the same time. The interesting thing is the waist goes just prior to the bow, so that they go off at the same time, right? Otherwise, the bow's out in front. But bang, you shoot both those guys at the same time. The bow turns to the right, the waist turns to the left. Why? Because that's the clearing turn direction, so that they make sure they don't smack into each other, and then they can join right up. And then, of course, you have what do you call it when you have like two airplanes on the bow and you shoot them one after the other? Whack, whack. Like if you double hook them.
Double hook, yeah,
Right?
a double hook.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you could sit there and you could put two airplanes in tension on Cat 1 and Cat 2, which I've only done once. And I remember it was so much fun because I'm on Cat 2 and we just like, holy cow, it's just probably a fly off or something. And we put both airplanes in tension, and the shooter, she looks over at Cat 1, boom, they go. And I've already wiped out. I'm ready. I'm at full power. She looks at me and boom, I hit a salute, like ready to go. And she's like, holy crap, winds are good, go, bam. And we did the double hook. But in any case, so day VFR, event one, we shoot off roughly, we're shooting for no more than a minute in between the airplanes. We get all the airplanes airborne, done. And now we respot for event two. And so what does that mean? That means we're going to move the airplanes around. An airplane might be started up on the 3 or the 4 row, which is sitting on top of Cat 2. And it gets started, and then it gets they taxi it clear, move it back to the landing area, and create this daisy chain behind each of the catapults, so that you have all these airplanes lined up between Cats 1, 2, 3, and 4.
So here's where your memory fails you a little bit, right, boss? Is we pre-spot both events 1 and 2, and
good point.
why do we do that? Because we don't have a recovery. We don't have a recovery to worry about. So we can both events 1 and 2, all of the airplanes that are going to launch on both of those events should be designated and in their appropriate spot if handler is on his game. That way he doesn't have to move jets around the flight deck for those first 2 launches, right?
Great point. That's a great point. So you sit there and you have a plan for events 1 and 2, and the whole point to that is that there's, like you said, nobody to recover. So you launch event 1, they're up in the air and they're flying around for, let's say, an hour, because it's a 1-hour event on event 1 for whatever reason. Event 2 comes up and they're going to launch 11 and recover 10. Well, they're going to launch those 11 airplanes, which have been pre-spotted, and off they go. And when the last one goes, we now have a ready deck. Well, wrong term, but the aircraft, the landing area should be clear, that we should be able to recover the aircraft. And so we time it so that the last airplane is shot, the shooter off the waist, the shooter wraps the waist as the first aircraft to recover is coming into the break. And then they land and catch the wire and trap and clear the LA. And then the interval between each of those airplanes, ideally 50 to 60 seconds, usually about a minute is about average of what we need between. And that's just to catch the wire, do a quick pull back, spit the wire out of the hook, raise the hook, fold the wings, raise the flaps, fold the wings, clear the landing area, make it clear, reset the cables, reset the weights, reset the lens. All right, gear lens set, 360 Hornet, boom. And off we go. So that,
boss, what did you mean when you said wrap the waist?
well, that's a good question. So when you have Cat 3 and Cat 4, so we probably need to talk about the catapult. The catapult is basically a cylinder underneath the flight deck with a big piston inside of it. And that piston on the very top of it, almost like a shark fin, is the shuttle. And the shuttle is the part where the airplane attaches to the catapult. And that thing sticks up out of the flight deck, of course. And if you were to run over that with your airplane tire or something. It could slice the tire, and it's basically a hazard on the flight deck. So what happens is Cat 3 and Cat 4, those shuttles, you shoot them, they're running running to the end. And to wrap the waist, meaning get the landing area ready to recover airplanes, the first thing you can do is Cat 4. All you got to do is run that shuttle all the way back aft, and boom, it's clear of the landing area. That's fine. 3, you run that shuttle all the way aft, and you put a cover on it, the little orange cover called Fast Eddy. And it's basically like a little ramp so that if you hit it with your tire, it just it doesn't slice the tire. It just pops over it. You're also going to put these blocks all the way up and down Cat 3 that basically brace it. And they're going to put these little speed handles. They're basically screw them in all the way up and down. And then they're going to put put the rubber thing down as well, right? Don't they? In between?
Nope.
No, they don't.
Nope. Rubber thing would be a FOD hazard, right? But yeah, they're going to put buttons in the cat track. And like you said, they're going to use a speed handle to do that. They essentially, this is the NASCAR part of the job,
good analogy.
Right? Man, I mean, those guys, when you say wrap the waist, and we want that done in 90 seconds, right? A full wrap, we want it done in less than 90 seconds. And when we're being evaluated, when we're being graded, the idea is that they wrap the waist and get off the flight deck, and an airplane hits the deck 10 to 15 seconds later, right? I mean, it's that quick. And so they're out there busting their butts as fast as they can. Each one of those buttons has a single bolt in it that locks it in place. And so they're speed handling down between 12 and 14 buttons, depending on the ship and where they've placed them, et cetera. And the purpose of the buttons is so that the wire, the cross-deck pendant, which gets dragged down the deck after the trap, doesn't fall into the cat track and then either damage the wire or the shuttle as it comes back, right, is really kind of the purpose.
Okay, that's a good. It's funny. I've forgotten all about that. In my mind, I was like, it braces it. No, it's not bracing it. That's right. It keeps the wire from getting caught in there. I had forgotten about that, and that's a great point. So the airplane comes in, so you shoot off the waist, you wrap the waist, so you bring Cat 4 back, you bring Cat 3 back, you put the buttons in, you cover up Fast Eddy. They clear the landing area, give a thumbs up, set the gear, set the lens in the landing area, and we're now ready to recover aircraft. Remember that, there's a little bit of an art form on the handler's part because, which one's quicker to wrap, Cat 4 or Cat 3? So I think they would try to launch Cat 4 last, right? Wouldn't it be so that you could get so that you would be able to retract Cat 3? It was ready to go. You launch Cat 4 and you put the buttons in while you're retracting Cat 3. Is that what we would do? Refresh me on that.
Yeah. So what we do is like when you had 3 aircraft left on the waist, right? You'd load Cat 3, load Cat 4, and you'd have your third aircraft behind Cat 4, right? So then you can't shoot Cat 4 ahead of Cat 3. So you'd fire Cat 3. Usually the bow would fire right after that, while the waist shooter turned around to address Cat 4, right? Go 3, and then let's just say 2, and now the waist shooter turns around to address Cat 4. They shoot Cat 4. Now it's going to take you about 2 minutes to get the airplane behind JBD4 loaded onto Cat 4. During that 2 minutes, you're going to call, hey, let's wrap Cat 3. Now, you're not wrapping the entire waist. You're just wrapping Cat 3. The goal there is that Cat 3 is the hard one. That's the one that takes all the time. So while you're loading the airplane onto Cat 4, you wrap Cat 3. At some point in there, whether the bow shot again or not, the shooter now addresses Cat 4, sends that airplane off. Now, when you call wrap the waist to get ready for the recovery, all they have to do is bring the shuttle back on Cat 4. That is easily less than a 30-second job. And those guys are off the deck and you are wrapped up and ready to go just like that.
Oh, what a great summary. That's perfect. Awesome. So they wrap the waist, and who is it that's putting those buttons in?
The topside catapult team, right? Your V2 maintainers and, topside safety, the shooter's doing the checking, right? He's the one
over there. He's kicking them, making sure that they're tight. So they get it's all just wrapped. And we still actually might be shooting off the bow
Yeah, and,
when the
and
landing
if you're
area
doing
is
things
ready,
perfectly,
right?
if you're trying to be as efficient as possible, you've planned it so that you have between 2 and 3 jets left to fire off the bow while you're recovering on the waist, because that's how you gain efficiency, right? Is by launching and recovering simultaneously. Yeah.
And now, obviously, ship specific, because the ships are different, built different sizes and things like that. There are certainly issues with Cat 2 fouling the landing area. So if you're trying to shoot an airplane off of Cat 2, depending on the type of aircraft, the wing might go over the foul line for the landing area. And I remember on the Eisenhower, Baby Hornet, but a Super Hornet did. Do I have that right? I think it did on the.
Yeah.
And certainly an E2 would, or something like that. How about the new ones? How's the Ford? Do the Bowcats foul the landing area? Does Cat 2 foul the landing area with a Super Hornet?
It does not. And so we did get a little smarter with the new ship design. People did realize that designing it so that you could fire Cat 2 without affecting the landing area at all was the way to go. And so it was designed from the get-go so that you could shoot Cat 2 and recover aircraft simultaneously. Of course, not an E2 or a COD, as you mentioned, with the wing spread. That's an 80-foot wingspan, and you're not going to get away with that. But for 90% of our launches and recoveries, which are essentially fighters, you can launch and recover simultaneously off Cat 2 on Ford.
Great point, because especially when you think about like CQ, where you're going to be shooting off the bow constantly with the landing area open. Because on carrier qualification, CQ, what you do is you have the landing area open, and an airplane in the pattern is just going to work the landing area. And at the same time, somebody traps, they move them off. If they have enough gas, they go flying. If not, they gas, and then they go fly. And so you're constantly shooting off the bow and constantly recovering. If you had something like the Eisenhower where Cat 2 fouled the landing area, that means you were generally only using Cat 1 during CQ, because it was just kind of complicated otherwise. And I do know there were times when we'd be like, hey, Cat 1's down, and we're doing CQ, and Cat 2 is going to foul the landing area. You're like, oh, wow, it just got hard. So I'm glad to hear that we've learned that lesson and moved on. So that's really good. That's great. So, getting back to cyclic ops. So we talked about, you shoot it, you wrap the waist, you're ready for that recovery. The airplane comes around the corner. The V2 guys, the guys in the arresting gear, are now getting the landing area and the arresting gear ready for the recovery. So they have to do a few things to get ready for that first recovery. So the lens has to get set, and the arresting gear has to get set. Let's talk about both of those things. So first, let's talk about the arresting gear, because I think it's a little bit easier to discuss. Gear, we have to set it to a weight. So the Tomcat came aboard a single weight setting of 54,000 pounds, meaning that was the maximum arrested landing. For the Hornet, we set 360. For the Baby Hornet and the Super Hornet, I don't remember the setting. 44,000 for the Super Hornet. And you could play around with that, and there are things we could do in the aircraft recovery bulletins based on emergencies and things like that. But in general, we would set a weight setting. And so each of those, under each of the wires, is an arresting gear engine. And that engine, thinking of traditional engine, is basically a mechanical brake, is basically the way to think about it. You've got this big, giant wrapped across a multi-level block and tackle system that is attached to a big giant piston and a cylinder that is dampened with hydraulic fluid. And this big giant cable is called a purchase cable, purchase because it attaches to something, and it runs through this block and tackle system and out a series of pulleys all the way out to the up onto the flight deck, where it then terminates, at which point we now attach something called the cross deck pendant, or CDP. The CDP is merely that section of cable that is, for lack of a better word, it's an expendable item. It can only be used 100 times, and then you have to disconnect it. So there's a connection between the purchase cable, which is on the arresting gear engine, which connects to the cross deck pendant, where they are attached, and it runs across the landing area. Now, on that gear, that engine, as the airplane comes around, let's say that it's a Super Hornet, you're going to set 44,000 pounds. Basically sets a valve on that arresting gear engine that meters the flow of the hydraulic fluid out of that cylinder, right? So as the airplane hits the cross-deck pennant, it yanks on the purchase cable, which goes through this block and tackle system that basically starts pulling on this piston that goes shoving into this cylinder filled with hydraulic fluid. That fluid has to go somewhere. If it went nowhere, it would just be like a brick wall, and bam, it wouldn't fall. But it has this valve which allows the fluid out at a certain rate, and that weight setting determines the size of that opening. And then when it hits, it is shoved into the cylinder, which pressurizes the hydraulic fluid, which shoots out of the small hole in the valve at a specific rate, which meters the force the cable can accept while that airplane is hitting it with the hook and pulling it out. How was my explanation for that, Flash?
Right on. Right on.
Do you think our listeners understood what I was saying? Because sometimes I use a lot of words there. But so I remember that the valve on that arresting gear engine was it's a fine piece of machinery.
Yeah, the constant runout valve, the CROV. Yep.
Thank you. That's essentially the most important part of the engine, right?
It's your critical safety item. You know, it's going to determine the successful whether your arrestment's successful or not.
Right. So things go well. It basically sets a certain amount of force that resistance of the hydraulic fluid creates a certain amount of force. Pull on the cable so that when you land, your aircraft hook hits that cross-deck pennant and starts yanking on it. There's a certain amount of force that pulls it to a stop in about 1 to 2 seconds over a span of whatever the.
It's generally around 350 or so, 350, okay. 360, something in that general neighborhood.
Going to sit there and go, a couple hundred feet. I don't remember. 350, 360 is much more exact. So it runs out like 350, 360 feet. That's great. And that's how it's supposed to work. Things don't work as planned. And we could talk about that again later, but you certainly don't want at launch, if that CRO constant runout valve is in a wrong setting and it's set for a lighter weight and a heavier airplane hits it, obviously you would have a longer runout. And if the runout is too far, you could break things. You could break that arresting gear engine. You could yank, you could break the airplane. The airplane could go off the end. There's all sorts of bad things that could happen. You could snap a cable if it's set to the wrong setting. All sorts of bad things could happen if it's set to the wrong setting. Now, that said, back originally, it used to be, the way it was set was that the spotter, the LSO platform, would be looking out there and he goes, Rhino at the 90. So a Rhino's a Super Hornet. And then he would call through the sound-powered phone, and they would say, one set 440, two set 440. And they would all make sure that all four engines set to the right single aircraft weight setting. Is that still the way it's done now, or is it done digitally?
Yeah, well, when you say now, if you're referring to Ford and AAG, it's kind of a whole different ball game, right? Because there's no weight setting. But the process for legacy, right? Yeah, the process for legacy is identical. The Pri-Fly recovery operator, your primary interface to the landing gear, to the arresting gear, right? The guy that you count on to communicate both problems from arresting gear and your orders to the arresting gear. That guy is going to digitally, as you mentioned, set all of those weights depending on the aircraft. And then the individual engine operators below decks are going to confirm that weight. So if everything's working great, then awesome. If the primary recovery operator for whatever reason loses control over the overall system, then the individual engine operators are responsible for setting the proper weight, and they will individually roger up each setting back up to the tower before he says, gear lens set, Rhino.
Exactly. Okay, got it. That makes sense. So that's the arresting gear. That's how we set the arresting gear for that first aircraft coming aboard. The next one is the lens. So the lens is an interesting piece of machinery. So the Fresnel optical lens system.
Yeah. IFLAWS is improved Fresnel lens optical landing system. Yeah.
And so the I for improved Fresnel lens optical landing system is just it's got more lenses in it. The concept here is that as you're coming aboard the aircraft, let's talk about some geometry for a second. The idea is not that the the pilot or the wings need to fly a certain path. The idea is that the hook needs to fly a certain path through the sky, and we want it to nominally fly at a 3-degree glide slope compared to the ship. And that gives us a hook to ramp distance of, was it 14.1 feet was the nominal? Is that right?
For a Tomcat, yeah. Well, I know minimum's 10, right? We never want it less than 10. Maybe all the airplanes were supposed to cross at the 14.1 sounds familiar.
Hook point should cross at a consistent point, which brings us to hook to eye, but we'll come to hook to eye distance in a second. So in any case, so what the idea is that we want to draw an imaginary line through the sky where every hook point on every aircraft goes through it perfectly. And the different airplanes are, they're built differently. They come in at different angles of attack, different speeds, and the distance from my eyeball to my hook point is different depending on the airplane and how fast I am and all sorts of things. So if I am in a Tomcat, it was over 14 feet. And if I'm in a Hornet, it's something like, I don't know, 10 feet, whatever it is. I'm making up a number because I don't remember. I used to know these things, but I don't anymore.
For the hook to eye?
For the hook to eye.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think the Prowler hook to eye was enormous, right?
It was enormous. That's right. Because it was basically cocked way up. And so the pilot's eyeball compared to where his hook was is a certain distance vertically through the sky. So if we think about the hook needs to go a certain distance above the ramp, we add the hook to eye, and that's where the pilot's eyeball is. Okay. So the pilot's eyeball, we now need to draw the eyeball through a path in the sky, and we do that with the Fresnel lens. Well, what happens is the lens is not on center line. It's offset to the left of the landing area. It's over in the port catwalk on the ship. So it's off to the left. So you can't just angle it straight up and down. If you did, the pilot would actually be landing, he would be landing short. Because the eyeball would come down well short of where the lens was, and that's not where you wanted it. And so what happens is that what they do is they actually create this, think of like a plane of light that flies out of the lens, and there are several planes of light, and it's hard to do this without an image. But if you then roll it to the left, that plane obviously gets lower on the port side and higher on the starboard side. And you set it up so that plane for the center ball is at that pilot's eyeball, intended eyeball height, all the way down center line. And so we create what's called a roll angle. There's a lot more to the geometry of what we're talking about here. We could talk about relative wind across the deck. We can talk about true angle versus apparent angle, or what was it called? Effective angle, I think it was. All of those different terms, we can talk about that separately, but for the sake of this discussion, there's something called roll angle. And so the roll angle is set by the folks in the lens room, and the whole lens actually rolls to the left or to the right for that certain airplane. And so that's one of the things that we have to say. So it's gear lens set 440 Rhino, means the gear is set, the lens is set, and everybody's ready to come, and now we can carrier. While it's coming aboard the carrier, there's going to be an arresting gear officer who is one of the shooters who's sitting back starboard aft by the fantail in the catwalk.
GO on the starboard side on Nimitz-class carriers is outside. He's down on the catwalk, real close to where the ramp is, and he's going to clear the LA. His jobs are to make sure that the gear setting matches the airplane that he sees approaching the ship, to make sure that the landing area is clear and that the gear is ready to receive aircraft, right? So once he's satisfied that all of those conditions have been met, he's going to squeeze his pickle switch, and the landing area signaling status system is going to then turn the recovery lights on the flight deck green, right? And so now you've got a clear deck, and you have an indication on our ILARTs on the plat that says clear deck. You've got an indication on any AirBoss or the Boss and AGO recovery displays. You got a clear deck, and the LSOs see the big green light right in front of them turn on. It's either green or red. The deck's either clear or foul, right? So that he's got that dead man switch squeezed, and he'll hold that until the arrestment, right? Once the arrestment is completed and the aircraft rolls back due to the cylinder decompressing, then the gear puller will tell the pilot to raise the hook. He'll raise the hook and taxi out of the wires, and then they'll retract the wire, and the AGO has a sailor back there with him, and that sailor will take he's got a giant foot pedal, depending on which, whether it's the 1 wire, 2 wire, 3 wire, or 4, and he'll pick the right foot pedal, and then he'll stomp on it to get the gear to retract back to battery.
Okay, I'd forgotten about the foot pedal for the retract. That's right. And so that's all coordinated. The interesting thing is all this that's coordinated. It's more than just the AGO doing it. You've got there are yellow shirts directing the airplane out, and guys from V2 up forward making sure that the cable's clear, and they're giving them the retract sign, and then the yellow shirt over there giving them the flight deck's clear sign. I guess it's the flight deck chief, but or whoever it would be. But in any case, you've got all sorts of people that are coordinating all of these different movements, and it's by no means just one person doing it. Even though one person hits a switch and makes this happen, there's so much coordination going on. It's absolutely amazing. And so we would sit up there, you and I would sit up there in the tower, and sometimes you just, things just happen because you have all these people, all these professionals out there doing everything that they're supposed to. And it all just works, right? And so everything is just humming and it's working and it's great. And then all of a sudden, it doesn't. And something happens, right? And so we would have emergencies. We would have all of a sudden you get an E2 that's stuck in the landing area. I mean, we had that. Remember that one time when the E2 landed, blew a tire, and then we lost power to the landing area. Do you remember that one?
Not specifically. So when you say lost power to the landing area, I do remember the entire port side of the ship going down. And the thing about that is that we were about to rig and recover on Mobilus Station 3, which I don't know if I'd ever seen in 20 to 15 years of flying naval aviation, right? And I think that's a story that we need to tell that one. But
the way I remember it is it was compounded several things because it got very confusing because we had an E2 that landed. It was supposed to be a trap cat trap and blew the left tire on touchdown. And the tire blew and they were stuck in the landing area. And we were trying to get them folded and trying to get them clear of the landing area. They were stuck. We had to bring out the dolly or something like that. And once we get them out moving, CATSI is down there. They're trying to work a tanker plan and trying to get everybody, because this was a cat trap cat. So the E2 was supposed to come down, trap, and then they're going to switch seats, launch off Cat 1, and then come around and land last. So the entire recovery of 15 airplanes is behind them. And of course, there's somebody who's, 4 miles on final when this airplane gets stuck. And so we spent a while working on this, and it was something ridiculous, like 30 minutes trying to get this guy out of the landing area. And all of a sudden we're like, okay, we're ready. And we go, what happened to the power? And then all of a sudden Alray Bosun calls up and says, hey, we just lost power to the port side of the ship, right? Or whoever it was, combat systems, I don't remember. And we're like, oh my God. And so here we were in the Persian Gulf. We were probably CVOA 4 or something like that. And, or Indian Ocean. Where were we? I don't know where we were, but I remember just all of a sudden we were trying to figure that out, and the electricians came out and they're trying to work it, and it was I just remember getting yelled at by the captain quite a bit that night. Because he was like, "What is going on?" And we're like, "We don't know. We've lost power," and we finally got that E2 clear, and the electricians did some magic, but there was a whole bunch going on. What do you remember? Remind me about Mobilus Station 3, because I don't remember that part.
So taking a half a step back, right? Mobilus is our manually operated visual landing aid system, right? So it basically takes the place of the lens. If you lose the lens, you can use various iterations of Mobilus to provide the same visual landing information, which obviously is critical to getting fixed wing aircraft back aboard. So Mobilus Station 1, you just carry a box out to replace what we call the source, which is actually the meatball itself. off, right? So you've got your datums, which are your green lights that basically provide you with the neutral indication. And then you've got the source, which is the meatball actually moving up and down relative to the datums, right? So when you rig Modalist Station 1, what you're saying is my source is inoperative for whatever reason. And so, but I'm still going to use all of the reference lights that go around the source. And then the landing signal officers are going to manually control the meatball. And to do that, we just basically strap a box on the front side of the source, and the LSOs control it. That's Modalist Station 1. Modalist Station 2, you're going to rig an independent source and reference datums about, 50 feet aft of where the actual lens is located, something like that. Basically on the same, port side of the ship, the pilot is looking in roughly the same spot to find the meatball. And then the LSOs are going to manually control that. The issue is, and then Modalist Station 3 is on the starboard side of the ship. It has its own power generator. It has its own meatball, reference, wave-off lights, the whole shebang, right? The problem is that, especially talking to a pilot, right, pilots don't look at the starboard side of the ship when they're landing. That is outside of their scan pattern. This is nighttime, and we don't practice it. We practice. We have to prove that we can set it up during workups, right? And it's a timed evolution. It takes a while. It takes 3 to 5 minutes, something.
Long time.
It's a long time. And it is not desirable, right? Because it's completely different for the pilot when he's coming aboard. He's looking at the wrong side of the ship to get his primary glide slope information. So in this particular case, we've lost power to the port side of the ship on the O3 level. So we cannot rig Modalist Station 1 or 2, which is very unusual. That's a very unusual situation to have happen. And we had to rig Modalist Station 3, and the guys were out there about 3/4 of the way through that evolution when, as I recall, one of our young seamen, and I'm talking about like a third-class petty officer, was essentially going manual bus transfer switch by manual bus transfer switch down the P-way, and he found one that was in the wrong position. Now, how it got in the wrong position is anybody's guess, right? I mean, but these things are open in the P-way. There's too much equipment on the ship to put a lock or a cage around everything. It just can't be done. And this one was in the wrong position and basically had killed power to the port side of the ship. He saw it, he identified it, switched it over, and everything. So basically he found the on switch, turned it on, and all of a sudden we had power back to the port side of the ship. And we recovered the rest of that recovery with the lens, as designed.
I think we diverted one airplane, which was absolutely amazing. Do I have that right? I feel like we diverted one airplane and that was it. Because it was. Your memory's better than mine on that. That rings a bell. That rings a bell. But we didn't lose. We didn't lose a significant number. I know that. No, it was. I remember being shocked at how well it went. The only reason we lost that airplane is because we actually got a clear deck with the airplane at about a mile. And I remember holy cow, we're going to get this airplane. We're going to make it happen. It's going to work. And they got told to turn around because of a communication delay between, the folks down there. I think it was it was the admiral or CAG or somebody was looking at them at 2 miles going, there is no chance. Stop effing around. Get this guy out of here before we paint him into a box. Send him around and just send him on his way. He's too close. Whatever the case was. And I think he was below bingo. The case was. I don't remember for sure, but I remember being like, oh my God, we just lost one. We saved it, but it didn't work. But yeah, that was an incredible night. We should get Hitch on here, have him talk about it. He'll probably remember it in a completely different way than you and I did. Right. Which will probably have a lot to do with those idiots in the tower weren't doing their job. And if they took my landing area away from me, and if trap cat trap on the first event, whose idea was that? Then we'll get Nasty on here, and Nasty will be like, okay, you guys all should have been fired. Let me tell you how this works. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Well, that's okay. So that's an awesome sea story. So about bad weather, you have any good stories about bad weather?
My God, well, there's you not letting the air wing call low vis, which
God.
is one of my favorite all time. The air wing would call up every day and say, "Hey, recommend low vis calls."
No.
Go, what?
You're right, because we would sit there and down low, it would be awesome. And I remember going, I don't believe it. And I remember even one time the Admiral was on the cat, and he's like, what are they talking about? It's, you don't need low vis. Then he gets airborne and he calls up and goes, hey, tower, Admiral here. Let's do those low vis calls. You're like, oh,
right. And which is, yeah. So actually, that is a great point. And so if I can indulge with a sea story, not on Ike, but somewhat related, right? The views, the perspectives can be very different, right? So in the tower, we can look out the window and say, I've got 5 miles vis. I can see that airplane in the stack right now. I mean, I know we're good, right? Whereas if you're in the stack, the horizontal visibility might be significantly different than what we're seeing from the deck. And so you look across the circle and you can't see the other section, right? And which kind of prompts you to go, hey, I know the circle's only about 3 or 4 miles wide and I can't see those guys. So I can see them on link 16, but I can't see them with my eyeballs. So that's going to be a problem. So related story, quick. When I was a Nugget, when I was an ensign, this is my first deployment on Kitty Hawk. We're doing a Westpac, and we are no blue water. Like, this is real blue water. We are in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and I don't care how many tankers you get out there. If it's not a KC-135, you don't have anywhere to land, right? This isn't one of those, well, we're pretending we're blue water. So we had to fly for currency. We took off. I was on the first event with Trax Higgins. We launch into a beautiful blue sky, and we're going to go out and do BFM with the XO. And Trax just waxes him up one side and down the other, which was wonderful. I mean, we just had the best time for that first 1 hour cycle. Right? We come back overhead the ship. And we're setting up in the pattern, and we're like, oh, yeah, it's okay, it's great. There's the ship. It's a little hazy, but all good, right? Well, as soon as we start commencing and rolling down for the recovery, we get down to about 1,000 feet, and the ship kind of disappears. And I mean, we're case one overhead, so we're not more than initials 800 feet, 3 miles, right? There's no way we're more than 3 miles after the carrier, and we cannot see it.
Wow.
So we're the first ones down. Tomcat's always first, the 2K overhead in the stack, first ones down, right? So we're leading the section coming in, and Trax is just like, hey, Flash, you got the ship? I'm like, I can't see anything. And he's like, okay, hey, we're not just that we're recommending low vis, we're recommending case 3.
Wow.
I mean, because we can't down a little, we cheated a little bit. We went down to about 400 feet. We could see the water, but we could not see the ship. We dipped down a little bit to 400 feet and up to 1,200 feet. It doesn't matter. In that range, there is no horizontal visibility whatsoever. So we come back up and we're like, hey, recommend case 3. Our horizontal visibility is less than a mile. So they sent us all out to Marshall, set up and come in for case 3 approaches. Guys are breaking out at a quarter mile. You've got almost every airplane coming down is paddles contact. And so obviously when you have paddles contact, essentially you're flying your needles down to the ship, right? And the pilot is concentrating on his instruments and trying to be on glide slope and taking peeks outside, but may not be able to see the ship. Paddles most likely will see the airplane before the pilot sees the ship in those kinds of cases. So we've got paddles contact going on all over the place. Ended up, they waved us off on our first pass. We didn't go down the right side of the island, but we were headed for the right side of the island. Trax made a big correction left, and we went down the angle, got back out, and we were the second guy to successfully recover. And then we got in the ready room and watched the rest of the air wing go round and round, and a Hornet actually did go down the right side of Kitty Hawk's Island on that recovery. It's now, I was so new that while excited, I wasn't into that, oh my God, I almost died category, because I just didn't know any better, right? Looking back, that was the most varsity recovery I have ever experienced in my life. And a bunch of guys came real close to putting a jet in the water that day. They sent S3s in all directions trying to find a clear space to decide if they were going to try to launch tankers, keep us overhead, and then get to the clear space and whatever. But there was just haze for miles. Like they couldn't find one, right? So that coming back, that's an illustration of literally when we were at 2,000 feet overhead the ship, it looked like a normal day to us. And it was a little hazy. As soon as we got down at the altitude where we needed to recover, the horizontal visibility was nothing. And I would not have said that, being overhead, I would have said, no, it's fine. And then when we got down in it, I was like, oh, this is not good.
Well, I tell you, you bring up a great point, and it's a reminder that. So you remember, well, what we're talking about here is where I said you and I are in the tower going, "Hey, this looks fine down here. What are you talking about, low vis? You don't know what you're talking about." And so we'd say, "No,"
denied. And then they would make fun of us at Forecastle Follies, right?
That's what I was going to go with. I was going to say they make fun of us. I'm like, you know what? That was completely deserved. And valid trigger squeeze, valid for time of flight. Absolutely should have been made fun of. Absolutely got the call wrong on my end for sure, 100% that was the wrong way to do it. But your story reminds me of another one. I remember a time we were off of Anchorage, Alaska. I was in VF-31 at the time. And so we were out there, CAG 14 on whatever carrier that was. I don't remember. But we were out there and I was on event 1 and we launch and it's supposed to be a normal day, right? The weather forecast is fine. We launch event 1. There's some puffies around and we go up to do a 1-hour BFM cycle. So we're working blue water ops. Even though we're not far from Anchorage, we're still working blue water ops with tankers just so we can recover with less gas. And back expecting case 1 recovery, we work our fuel ladder that way. And we come back, we check in with Marshall. I say, case 3 recovery, CV1 approach. We're like, uh-oh. So we throttle way back. And we're looking down going, yeah, sure enough, I see a cloud layer below me, but I didn't realize it was case 3. Well, so we come down and it's not even case 2 where you bring a section in. It's case 3, which is one airplane at a time. So we set up, and of course, I'm the first one down. I'm in a Tomcat. I'm down at 2. I come bring it in from 6,000 feet, first one down, and I get down there, and it's 101 3/4 mile on and on. Call the ball, and I'm still above the cloud layer. 101 Claret. I can't see the ball. I can't see the ship. I can't see nothing. And it's like 99 taxi lights on so that paddles can see us. We got those things on and we're coming down and I got nothing. And then it's like wave off, boom, take it around. I wave off. I'm right on center line. So I'm not worried about going up the starboard side of the ship, but I look down and looking straight down, I can see the ship, right? Matter of fact, I'm going on my go around and I'm like, oh, there's the tower just to my right, right? Boom. I just went right past it because I'm right on center line. I'm like, oh, and I can see the ship looking straight down, but I can't see it looking forward. At 200 feet, I could not see it. I'm sure I probably pushed it a little bit and I still couldn't see it. So we take it around. Next guy, same thing. Well, I told you this was event 1. They launched event 2 to recovery of event 1.
Right.
And the weather was so not forecast that, oh my God, they just launched event 1. And event 2, or they launched event 1. Event 1 can't recover. Event 2's in the air, and they're like, holy cow. So they're like, 99, your signal divert, right? I'm like, ooh. So we're working Elmendorf. And, everybody's looking at the gas. We're like, okay, actually, I have enough gas. I'm going to be okay. Well, I start heading towards Elmendorf. And back in my head, I have this little voice. The little voice, when I listen to the little voice, I'm never wrong. But sometimes I don't listen to the voice, and I'm wrong. And the little voice says, should come up on the radio and tell everybody, remind them to do their ship to shore checklist. and I go, and I basically think to myself, no, we're all professionals. I don't need to do that. And so the ship to shore checklist, at the time, anti-skid on, lights were on, and hook up right? and so of course I don't say this. Well, the first there's a hornet out in front of us. He comes around and lands. I think it's runway 6 at Elmendorf. I don't remember for sure. He comes around, lands. He's on the rollout. No big deal. He's heading down. He's going to exit. And he drug his hook all the way down the runway and caught the long field gear. Well, the long field gear basically runs out so that it goes right through the intersection of the 2 runways. So he has now fouled the entire airport with the 2 runways. And you got the whole air wing flying over Elmendorf now, dirtying up, getting ready to come in. And the first guy down has now fouled the runway. And there's a flight of 4 Eagles at the hold short waiting to go. It's like, awesome, the Navy's here, right? So we start to do this circle around. And now, so we were trying to save gas over the carrier. Now we're trying to save gas over Elmendorf. And now all of a sudden people just start peeling off and going over to Anchorage. They're just like, shoot, we're going to Anchorage, because it's right there. And so people keep going. And then they finally... the airport was caught off guard by the gear getting pulled out. So they weren't ready to go retract it. So they finally get the guy out of the gear. They finally get it retracted and we clear the runway. And I remember landing with low fuel lights on that one, as was everybody else. Now, that's not the funny part of the story. The funny part is prior to this, Sully Sullivan and I have been having arguments for weeks. We were the 2 training officers at the time. We were having arguments for weeks about the meaning of blue water. And his contention was blue water, we will never, ever divert. And mine was, hey, yeah, we're blue water for fuel purposes, but you never know what's going to happen. You should always fly with your wallet. And he says no. Well, we land in frickin' Anchorage. Basically half the air wing lands there. And there's me and one other asshole with our wallets. Nobody else has money on them. Nobody else has anything else. And it's mornings. Everybody's hungry. So we all go to Subway. And I'm out like, $200 or something like that. I'm buying lunch for everybody. Because I'm the only idiot who brings money.
I was going to say that was strategic maneuver on Sully's part, right? He didn't think that at all, but he's like, well, I'm not bringing my wallet because I know Crunch is going to be buying. He already told me he's ready anytime to divert.
I was like, oh my God, I'm the only idiot who brought, because I'd been like, you should always bring your wallet because you just never know. Even in blue water, I bring it. I'm like, crap. Now I'm out like 24 steak sandwiches, like, all right, whatever. So that was it. Then later that day, the weather clears, we all fly back to the ship. But that's an example, just like you're saying, where the weather rolls in and you never know what's going to happen. Holy cow. Yours is scarier. Mine is funnier. But golly.
Yep.
Holy cow. Thanks for listening. This is Air Boss on Authentic Production.